natural hazards, is it actually just about recognising the risk? Like when I read the Royal Commission, part of the problem was that ECAN and the council go, yeah, there's risks, and we'll just tell you what they are, but we didn't actually. We needed to be, in my view, we needed to be a lot more proactive around preventing development happening where there's recognised natural hazards.
No. It's not recognised natural hazards.
The risks.
It's the level of risk that is faced. Otherwise, we'd have no development on any of the Port Hills at all.
That's right.
Because actually, one day something might happen that would happen once in a squillion years.
Yeah. So, but there's a difference between recognising the risk.
Yes, I agree.
And actually enabling development because you've told people that there's a risk. So now you can go ahead and develop. And I was hoping that this plan would be more directional around.
So maybe the word recognises isn't quite the right word.
Perhaps, Madam Chair, I could just highlight that we are coming back to you with the natural hazards chapter.
Yes, I know.
That deals with the objectives, policies and rules relating to natural hazards on the 6th of May, which will have in it, I think, what you're looking for.
Yeah,
Councillor.
but I think there's something more than just recognising the risk.
Yeah, no,
it's
I agree.
Are we talking about responding to the risk too then?
Yeah.
Yep.
Management, yes.
Yep, management.
Or, well, because there are a variety of ways.
Yes.
Because I mean, in certain areas we actually avoid risks from natural hazards because we are both aware of them, and they're the risks associated with them are both sort of real and present. So and unable to be mitigated against. So
you could use the word management as just an overall, a catchphrase, or you could use the words of the Act: avoid, remedy, or mitigate.
Avoid, remedy, or mitigate the risks from natural hazards. How's that?
Just to be clear, there is actually a specific natural hazard objective in this chapter, which, and I'll read it because it's quite short. So that is that the risk to people, property and infrastructure from natural hazards is avoided or reduced to acceptable levels. It's still quite a high order objective, but it raises the sorts of issues that we're talking about. The only reason we were suggesting to add something else to this chapter was that natural hazards is a particularly important consideration when we're talking about the pattern of development. So we just wanted to flag it. At this point, it's just really a flag that we're putting in there. There's this other objective, which is specifically on natural hazards in this chapter. And as Brigitte said, there will actually be a whole natural hazards chapter, which will actually get a lot more specific.
Could you just read that line again?
Yes, sure. The risk to people, property and infrastructure from natural hazards is avoided or reduced to acceptable levels.
Isn't what we're trying to achieve through this policy setting, objective, development, form and function, is actually avoiding the development in areas of high risk from natural hazards? I mean, shouldn't we just say what we're
where the
doing?
risk cannot, avoiding development where the risk cannot be avoided, mitigated or managed,
So we've got a plan that's basically very permissive at the moment. What we're doing is tightening it up to say, actually post-earthquake and probably pre-earthquake, we knew that these areas have high risk. We're now putting an extra layer of protection or prevention because these areas are no longer considered.
Look, the circumstances change, and I mean, 20 years ago, we might have thought that, 20 years ago, we might have thought that a particular risk couldn't be mitigated against, but new technology says that it can be. So I think that these documents always have to speak in the present. So we can't reflect on where exactly we are at the moment, and I quite like using the language that we've already got in the legislation, which is, what is it again? No, not that one.
Not that one.
I think that's too long.
Oh, avoid, remedy or mitigate.
Avoid, remedy or mitigate. Yeah. That wouldn't cause problems for your objective.
No, that wouldn't cause problems for the objectives and the chapter further on.
But I think it also spells out that we're taking a stronger role, and the government's already announced that it's taking a stronger role in terms of the RMA and its lack of sufficient focus in this area.
Okay, moving on to, I'd spoken about the adding restoration in respect of the central city. So the next point after that was in relation to the distribution of commercial activities and development of commercial centres. There were 2 points raised. One was seeking some general objectives and policies on commercial activities, and the comment there is that that's actually already in the chapter. And the second was seeking some very detailed policies about where and how commercial centres shall be developed, particularly key activity centres. Those are quite specific policies. We have policies dealing with those issues already in the commercial chapter, specifically on key activity centres, and it seemed to be a level of detail that wasn't appropriate for these high order objectives and policies. So the recommendation there is not to make an amendment to this chapter.
Is anything being done around the request that we've made that if you've got a big key activity centre, commercial centre over a certain size, there's an expectation or a requirement that something comes back to the community? So you can buy up all the neighbourhood,
I
but
think
actually...
that's a comment that you can probably ask Mark Stevenson.
Yeah.
Sorry,
But should we be
Mark
signalling
Stevenson.
that in the strategic, because it's a new strategic direction, where if you've got, a big thing that basically takes over the whole neighbourhood, there's a requirement to provide community infrastructure.
Yeah,
It's quite a difference to where we've been in the past, where you basically just get consent and keep expanding.
It's probably not so much a high order strategic issue as a detail in terms of how different sorts of centres develop.
I have to say, with all due respect, I really disagree. This is a strategic direction I think we should be sending, because in the past we haven't, and it is incredibly strategic in terms of our bus routes, bus terminals, community centre. I mean, it is really important. It's a fundamental shift in a strategic direction that said we just enable this development without any thing coming back and at whatever cost, versus being having a much more concentrated idea that if you get these huge conglomerates of activity, that there is a responsibility to do something to provide community infrastructure.
With your leave, Madam Chair, Mark Stevenson has a response to that issue which was raised. We don't intend to ignore it at all, but that will come shortly when we go over the revisions to the commercial chapter. And if at that time it's considered that something should go into the strategic directions chapter, we can take that on board.
Yeah. The other thing that's worth noting there is that the strategic directions chapter already activity centres should be our focus for transport, for commercial activities, for community facilities, for a wide range of things. So the general direction is already there, and really the commercial chapter just brings in the detail of exactly what is going to be provided in those commercial zones.
That's right. So if we can move on, and we will come to that matter in the commercial chapter and then make a decision then.
So the final point raised was in terms of urban design, two issues there. One, that a balanced approach needs to be taken because there are both costs and benefits to urban design, and the comment that is made there is that in fact the chapter already recognises that there are those costs and benefits. But the second issue raised was that urban design is probably more important in some environments than others, and that's an appropriate sort of comment, and I think it's worth recognising that. So the suggestion there is that in the discussion of the issue at clause 3.4.3, which is page 9, we make an addition there. Page 9.
B.
In B, so that's the second set of orange wording on page 9.
Just, it just doesn't sit entirely easy with me that, and I guess it's around that, how you get a balance. I accept that some areas, the urban design is quite crucial in terms of how our city centres and some of the key local areas might be an example with the shops, and also with this more intensive housing, say. But it just seems to sort of reduce, I don't know, I'm not entirely comfy with the statement. In terms of it being important across the city, really.
Certainly the intention of the statement is not to say it's not important across the city, but that it's more important in some areas than others. And this is reflected in the proposed provisions that you'll see, either have seen or will see in chapters. For example, in industrial areas, you won't see as much control on urban design as you will have seen in commercial centres, for example. So there is a different approach being proposed for different areas, depending on how important they are, how sensitive they are.
So I too am quite concerned about this. If you take the example of the Mitre 10 in Ferrymead, for example, having these big buildings painted, bright colours, and that was adjacent to a conservation area, but it just, I don't know, we should be allowing a city to just develop without good urban design. I mean, it just seems most people actually want us to have better urban design, and I don't know how you distinguish between areas that should just, like, if you take some areas in Woolston, for example, I'd want good urban design along the river. I'd want it through a major tourist thoroughfare, but that's an industrial area, but it doesn't mean that it should be sort of second class. No. So I'm concerned at watering down the urban design issues.
May I comment? I don't believe it is at all attempting to water it down, but it is indicating that each chapter has a certain level of urban design within it. And when you hear about the industrial chapter, you will see that there are still some rules about urban design, but perhaps not as detailed and not as wide-ranging as we would have under residential or some of the commercial areas. This is, is it an objective?
No, it's an issue.
No, it's only an issue that's in here at the moment. But harking back to an earlier discussion that we had today, this is one of the key issues that you will need to have discussion with on the ministers regarding comments.
Yep.
It is an issue of balance because there's been a number of submissions that we've had that promote good urban design, not only from individuals but from organisations, and then we also have the comments from CJOG, and we all are reminded of what happened with the CCRP.
Pauline?
A quick comment. It just seems to me that the term good urban design here is being tagged to an increased cost to implement that, and I don't necessarily see that equates. And I'm with Phil and Yanni. I'm not happy with that being written there, that good urban design is more important in some areas than others. And I wonder if we actually need to have that in there.
Well, I think...
But why wouldn't? Even if you're doing a factory, why wouldn't you have good urban design?
No, as I said before, in the chapters that are still to come, and in chapters in phase 2, there are generally comments for urban design. But for example, if you consider the rural chapter, it may not have a lot of rules about urban design in it. So all it is saying is that there are degrees of the amount of input we want to have on urban design, depending on what the main activity is of that area. There are still some urban design rules in the industrial chapter, and you will see that when it comes to you.
Perhaps there's a suggestion, because I think what we're talking about is two slightly different things. One is whether it's good urban design, and the other is how much control we have of urban design. And maybe it's actually the sentence should really talk about the need to manage urban design is more important in some areas than others. Is that, no?
I think that Andrew and then David.
Yeah, I mean,
wanted
the comment I was about to make actually reflects some of what you're just saying there. Maybe rather than saying there are some areas where urban design is more important than others, because I mean, that really to me does suggest that there are some areas where we see urban design as less important, if we're saying there are some areas where it's more important. Maybe if we said the urban design requirements vary according to different areas of the city with different uses, different needs, different zoning and so on, which sort of reflects what you've been saying, which I don't feel is reflected in the orange here. You know, we're talking in terms of importance. If we put that into terms of requirement within the plan rather than importance, it removes that suggestion that some areas have got less that urban design is less important in some areas.
I mean, the phrasing that was used in the committee comment was that the amenity benefits of urban design controls are more significant in some environments than others. But what you've written is
Good point.
the quality of the urban environment is more important consideration in some areas than others. And I just wonder whether you've actually captured what was intended. And I wonder whether that second sentence is actually unhelpful in light of the comments around, you know, a large box development that uses a very bright colour to advertise itself by painting itself that colour in a conservation area, you know, or being seen from a conservation area, i.e. right on the banks of the estuary.
Warranted. We can do some further work on that and bring it back to you.
Yep,
Is that all right? David, did you want to comment further?
Look, I just sat in a few moments ago. I was downstairs sitting in on the customer advisory group between major building companies and the consents team, both building and resource. And a comment that sort of came through there this morning, which sort of pricks my ears a wee bit with the sort of this urban design thing, was that a guy down there had a complex that he had submitted plans for that were fully compliant, yet the urban design panel were in disagreement with what he'd submitted. And he was basically told, well, his application is not going to proceed unless he takes some notice of the urban design panel. The urban design panel has no
Wasn't a retirement village, was it?
It
wasn't a
I
retirement
think it was just an industrial building of sorts,
Right.
commercial building. But my concern really was that, you know, you get someone that puts forward a plan that is fully compliant under the rules, and yet the urban design panel says we're not comfortable with it. And how do we get around the disparity between someone who puts up something that's fully compliant and yet the urban design panel says, no, we don't like it, and he's basically told, well, it's not going to proceed until you address the urban design panel's concerns, but the project is fully compliant?
Look, that's a very good question, and you need an answer to that. I think that's a good one for you to keep as a case study, a question for the urban design seminar or briefing that you'll be having on the 2nd of May, because you'll have all the key people here that will be able to answer that question. And those questions do need to be answered for you so that you are confident with what we're producing in these chapters is able to make some difference.
Yeah.
There is a difficulty, I'd have to say, with the operative plan because urban design doesn't feature in it as strongly as it possibly should.
Well, I'm probably just flagging that maybe we need to consider some more urban design
That's
standards in our district plan.
Which is what we are doing, and they are being brought to you within each chapter, though. There isn't a chapter on urban design. It features within each chapter.
Well, it certainly would overcome issues that I'm hearing on more than one occasion now where the urban design panel has no statutory significance, and yet compliant applications are being pulled manipulated to actually comply with something that they don't need to.
And this is part of that bigger question for you to raise with the ministers.
Yeah. So so that's the end of your presentation on that. We've got still the commercial to come now. Is that
Yes,
right?
just the commercial revisions to go over quickly, and then we'll go into the industrial chapter, and I'm hoping we'll get that finished so that we can also see through the land contamination chapter from 2 to 3.
But we won't be able to start the industrial chapter until after lunch.
That's
but
fine.
If we could get this commercial chapter out of the way now, and then we'll start back at 2 o'clock. At 1 o'clock with the industrial chapter.